right. The record button has been pressed. The guests are in the house. I'm excited to explore the world of plant medicines, connecting to breath. And I'm honored to be joined with Dr. David and Cordula.
Yes.
How do I say your name? I'm sorry. I should have asked that. Like we had a whole conversation before
I
I started.
know.
I didn't even
I,
know how
I
to
saw the
pronounce your
face
name.
you made as you were starting to say that.
If it makes you feel any better, even David can pronounce my name correctly. So it's all good. It's Cordula, but most people actually call me Cordy. So that's the way.
Well,
you need an Austrian accent to properly pronounce it, which just isn't fair.
Yeah, it's not fair. Cordy, welcome to the show.
Yes,
thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah, you're both so fascinating. I did a little research on you before you joined me today, and I'm excited to kind of learn a little bit what this whole becoming Om is all about, learning a little bit about our plant medicines, connecting to our breath and our bodies and being present.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you each go back and forth, give us a little background of yourselves, and we'll see where the conversation takes us.
Ladies first.
Yeah, let's do it. So it's a pretty long story with most things, like long and windy paths, and you find yourself in weird little places. But I am working as an integration specialist for plant medicine. I'm a plant medicine facilitator, mainly ayahuasca. I'm a breathwork facilitator, and in training with Stan Grof, the one and only in Czech Republic, for his 5-year legacy training, which is fascinating and amazing. And I am just an absolute lover of bhakti, which is, it's loving devotion. It's just making your life an offering. It is trying to really be of service in this world to other people and to just in community, really walk each other homes, like Ramdas would say. And there's just so many things that I'm passionate about. And I'm really hoping that we get into some of the, like all the good details and all the juicy stories of that. But I'm just very excited to be here and to share some of this with you and your listeners.
Cordy, welcome. Thank you so much. Dr. David.
Yes, sir. So yes, the doctor in the title refers to doctor of physical therapy. So I grew up in New Jersey. I spent my whole life there until I went to grad school in Delaware to become a doctor of physical therapy. I was working at a clinic in Delaware for about a year. Basically wanted to kill myself because I hated just the day-to-day life of an average working person, which is kind of sad. I guess I'm just not cut out for like modern society in that way. But I knew there was something more to be done. So when the pandemic hit, I took that as an opportunity to leave clinic life forever. And I launched my own business, Ground Game Physio, working exclusively with jiu-jitsu athletes like ourselves to teach people how to be healthy, take care of their bodies, train for life, all that fun stuff. And now where the psychedelics overlap comes in is I used to be very atheist. I was really interested just in like hard neuroscience and understanding the brain. So I got really into Sam Harris. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all.
Very familiar.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
As anytime I have an idea, I like to start in that Sam Harris extreme where it's very like disconnected and factual and just like, he's connected. I mean, he's a very thoughtful type person, but he tends to formulate an opinion. And I love where he sits because he's willing to change it. But yeah, absolutely. Very familiar with.
So yeah, that was for a while I was a hardcore Sam Harris fanboy, like super atheist. But Sam got me interested in psychedelics. So I tried some LSD and realized like, oh, I'm for sure not an atheist anymore after that experience.
You and Aaron Rodgers, man. I don't know. We can get into that in a little bit, but we
should get into that. So yeah, so I continued that path of just kind of experimenting with psychedelics, taking LSD, taking mushrooms. And then it kind of coincided actually with the jiu-jitsu camp. So there was a jiu-jitsu camp going on in Costa Rica with Silver Fox BJJ. I signed up for that. And I was like, well, while I'm in Costa Rica, I know they do ayahuasca in Costa Rica. So let's check that out. So I started doing some research and I found an ayahuasca center. Just the timing happened to work out. Like I was going to be in Costa Rica already. So I signed up for that. That was my first ayahuasca experience. And that was actually where I met Cordy when she was working there as a yoga instructor at that facility. And, Cordy mentioned the Bhakti yoga, which maybe we can dive some more into that. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but
I haven't. I wrote it down to bring it up later. So if we want to dive in.
Right on. So I was reading this book called the Bhagavad Gita right at the time where I went to that retreat. And it's all this like yoga philosophy. So when we use the term yoga, you think of like stretching, right? But there's so much more to it. Yoga by definition just means union with God, actually. So all of the stretching and poses and shit is just designed to get you there as one piece of the puzzle. So I'm at this ayahuasca retreat reading this book, and I have this experience one night during ceremony where all of this shit just completely sinks into my life. And it goes from being this neat idea to read about to having a lived experience of like communicating with God. And yeah, so that trip really sank that in, cemented it as part of my life. And then my relationship with Cordy has just led to that blossoming. And now we do our best to share that with people by connecting them to Mother Ayahuasca, by guiding their journey with microdosing, with other plant medicines. I'm actually really passionate about bringing this shit to the forefront in jujitsu, which maybe we can save that for another day, but I've got a whole other project up my sleeve designed to bring spirituality and microdosing to the forefront of jujitsu athletes. So yeah, man, fucking psychedelics completely changed my life in a lot of ways, and I'm helping to change other people's just like that.
Wow. That's all right. So a couple of things here. One,
yeah.
Are you in the States today? Are you located in this? This is kind of a hard proposition to pull off in the old US of A right now.
We are in Mexico.
Yeah, okay. We live in Mexico right now.
Yes.
And
what's up?
What are the federal I don't know, roadblocks? And like, do you have a history of why they're established? Because we hear a lot about this. We hear states like Colorado, for instance, at least decriminalizing. I don't know if it's legal to do mushrooms, or I don't know how much you can have. I don't know where they put the sidelines or where they move the goalposts or whatever. But if you could get myself and the listeners kind of acclimated to the current state of affairs in the US.
I can speak a little bit to that. I'm not completely up to date on what's going on in the US, just because like we moved a couple months ago and there's like so much going on. But it's interesting that you're mentioning Colorado, because that's where I did a lot of my training. Actually, I trained as a psychedelic guide / therapist with a cannabis and ketamine clinic in Colorado. And so the decriminalizing movement is, in Colorado, like Washington's mostly decriminalized now, and a bunch of other states. And what that means is it's not illegal. It's just the lowest level law enforcement. So they will basically not really spend any of the money to kind of like come after you. But it's not like, there have been a couple of instances when people were doing some like really big operations, just like huge, like, like mushroom grows and stuff, where they are getting into trouble. But overall, it is looking to get more into a direction where it's becoming more accepted, and especially with MAPS doing a lot of studies. So MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Sciences, is doing a lot of research with MDMA and MDMA-assisted therapy, and Johns Hopkins is also doing a lot of research for psilocybin-assisted therapy. So there are a lot of private institutions that are doing a lot of research, and so it is coming more into the forefront of, these are actually medicines and these are tools that can really help heal, and not just in a, hey, I'm going to take this pill forever, but you're going to have a couple sessions, you're going to get a lot of support both in the preparation and in the integration process. And it's really shown that it helps a lot of people for a long time, especially with severe PTSD, overcoming addiction and all that stuff. So that's about the extent of my current knowledge. But federally, it is still very illegal.
Yeah,
for sure.
No. So
dude, you were probably training jiu-jitsu during the lockdowns. Like, we're not going to let those pesky laws stop us.
Well, truth be told, we locked down for about 10 days. And then we might have many of the upper belts in our gym might have had keys to get into the gym.
I mean, maybe these things could happen.
And we might have showed up at the same times the class was scheduled, whether it was sanctioned by the gym or not. And we might have did that for like 4 to 6 months. I can't remember what it happened.
Wild,
exactly.
Dude.
Yeah. Hey, going back down the path of mushrooms. Let's talk about let's talk about magic mushrooms. Like I have a lot to be educated on. One, plant species tend to be extremely diverse. So not every mushroom is a magical mushroom, or however you say it. But here's the thing that I'm interested in. One, it's almost undeniable that there is medical benefit to these things. Like a lot of the literature points to that. There's all these like studies, like you're saying, I've read some before you guys came on today around PTSD, around addiction, that folks are finding these kind of experiences. I actually have had my own experience back in college with a substance that was a perspective shifting experience. Let's talk about microdosing versus like a heroic dose, as McKenna would say, and then also using it, incorporating it in your life, like taking it out of a stigma of a drug or a party drug or a recreational, like whatever. Like let's talk about mushrooms in that way.
Yeah, man. I think just the lumping in of psilocybin mushrooms with like party drugs, or even just the term drugs, is one of mankind's greatest mistakes ever, because it has led to this stigma around it. And I can't help but just think that the world would be such a better place right now if we had the last 60 years of this continued trend of widespread adoption and research that was shut down in the 60s and 70s. So, Cordy, maybe you can talk more to the microdosing versus macrodosing sort of thing and what's right for each person. But I do think just from the forefront, it's important to establish that this stuff is not just for partying. You know, you can definitely take some mushrooms and have a good time, and there's nothing wrong with taking it and laughing at the pretty colors you see and just having a great time. But for our purposes, we really look at it not as recreation, but as work, as training your mind and training your spiritual life and your psyche, and becoming aware of so many more things that just on a day-to-day basis never cross our mind. And once you are made aware of them, you can start working with that and start leveling up your life. Like, just to use a jiu-jitsu analogy, like how many people think that they would handle themselves well in a fight until they go to their first jiu-jitsu class and they just get their eyes opened wide by someone ragdolling them effortlessly, right?
Yeah, mine was a 15-year-old. I tell that story on a regular basis.
Yeah, that sounds about
got
right.
beat up by a high schooler day one.
So, you know, all it takes is a couple grams of these funky looking mushrooms to just completely destroy your sense of self and who you thought you were and how you thought the world works. But then once that happens, it opens up this whole new world of discovery and growth, just like jiu-jitsu does. So I don't know, I guess I just wanted to set the stage a little bit, talking about them kind of seriously and not just as a party thing or a fun thing, which again, nothing wrong with. Some people kind of cast judgment on people who just want to use it recreationally. I think that's okay, but I think it can be used as just such a tool to level up your life and level up your compassion for mankind, and ultimately level up just the fucking level of consciousness and love in the entire world. So I'll stop rambling and let Cordy answer your actual question.
I love the rambling, honestly.
I did too.
I think with both of them, both micro and macro, what's really important is set and setting. So set always refers to your mindset. So what is your intention with it? And the setting is what is the physical environment that you find yourself in? So where are you at? Who are the people that you're with? And I would love to start with microdosing. And mainly because microdosing is something that is becoming widely not only available, easier, but it is becoming widely acceptable. And the wonderful thing about microdosing specific, because you can microdose a bunch of things. You can microdose acid, you could microdose ayahuasca, like there is a bunch of stuff out there about that. But specifically with psilocybin, one of the really good things is that, as far as we know from the research that we have, is that there are no contraindications to any known prescription medications, which is huge, because a lot of like MDMA, ketamine, when you're working with ayahuasca, if you're on certain prescription medications, more specifically SSRIs, so antidepressants, that is not good and can actually be really dangerous for you. So with microdosing, it is something that, you know, you don't have to carve out an entire day because you're just going to be like tripping, and then you need to integrate that. But it is a practice that you can really establish in your daily life. And it is also a practice that invites you not just to take this medicine. And I always call it medicine because it's like David said, it's not a drug. It is from the earth. It is something that Mother Nature is freely giving to us, and humans have used for
forever,
tens of fucking millions, like as long as, you know, like humans and humanoids and apes have been around. I'm not sure. Are you familiar at all with the stoned ape theory?
I am. Yeah. I'm actually, I prescribe to it. I do think that
Oh,
there is certainly a symbiotic relationship to, with some kind of, bipedal hominid, and its relationship with mushrooms, or some kind of, ingestion of psychedelic, substances. I heard recently, and again, I told you guys before the podcast, I got exposed to some of these ideas through Rogan and Rogan podcast.
Dude, Rogan is the reason that I trained jujitsu.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. To be completely honest, him and a guy named Matt Berther, but for the most part, Rogan. But he's been talking on the podcast a little bit about, argot, and kind of like a mold or funguses or whatever that has, that is deeply rooted to the church. It's deeply rooted to these kind of ceremonies, things that have eroded over time, that are just in the echoes of the past, and that we sit here bewildered, wondering why we got here, but we are reluctant to trace our steps.
It's a great way to put it. We're reluctant to trace our steps. We're wondering how we got here, and we're maybe more importantly wondering where the fuck are we going to go now.
Yeah.
And there's this gentleman, Robert Edward Grant, who talks a lot about how this wisdom has been encoded in everything that the ancients left behind, with the intention maybe one day that we would decode it and spread this kind of stuff to the masses, and that would guide our way forward. But
yeah. No, it's funny, like a house will burn down and they can kind of trace it back to the match that lit it on fire, but if we can't do that with our biology today, which is that certainly can, a bit confusing, I guess. So
and I feel like we don't want to either, because when you look at the institutions, and if we're being honest, they don't want us to like know and like have access to things that could possibly enhance our mind and like open our consciousness and really have us thinking different and free. And that is where even like not just Christianity, but also when you look at Buddhism and Hinduism, and when you read the scriptures, and when you look at some of the, not just the statues, but the paintings, and they also had something called amrita and soma, and these are all believed to be psychedelic substances. So it's spiked wine and like other things, and it's not fully clear what it was. But when you look at like most ancient cultures and high cultures were using psychedelics on a very regular basis, and you can trace that back. In South America too, I think they found cannabis used like thousands of years ago, and this like little like shaman like sachet that they found kind of
it was like a medicine man's bag preserved like in the ice or something, and it had like DMT derivatives in it from like 10,000 years ago. So like this stuff is deeply entwined in the history of mankind, man.
And maybe we're just at a stage of humanity where we're teenagers, kind of denying our parents right now, just kind of revolting and trying to stay away from the things that made us who we are. I'm interested though. We talked a little bit about microdosing. When is the heroic dose called for here? The brain squeegee, the altar of, like you were talking about, you did it with ayahuasca. I want to get into ayahuasca in a second, but when I had a experience with mushrooms, my one and only experience, it was, I had to sit with myself for about a week just thinking about what the hell that was, and just, I didn't want to do it again, which I think is a good thing in some ways. It's not like one of those things where you just like run back and do it. I had enough where I had a lot of things that were on my heart that I didn't understand. And it was a real catalyst for me to start working through some things and trying to figure out who I am. And I looked fondly at the experience, though I did have, an unguided, kind of rough trip, on the second half of it. But like, how about the heroic dose?
With the heroic dose, the idea of set and setting is honestly even more important because, like you just said, there is a lot that can be unearthed through that.
Yeah.
And when you think of the average person who is, maybe not meditating, just very anxious, stressed out, and always rushing around, and how hard it is for the average person to sit with themselves, even for 5 minutes, let alone hours, just, kind of confronted with the absolute depths of their own self. And then the other realms that you may tap into, the transpersonal realms of, like spirits and, past lives, like all of these things that can come up in these journeys, how challenging that is and how confusing that can be for someone who just kind of like jumps into that without any preparation or without doing any research. So with a heroic dose, there's a couple of things. First of all, heroic doses, which is anything like 5 grams and over, where you really, really start to go deep. And it's actually cool because like I remember Sam Harris talking on like Tim Ferriss about that, where in terms of like dosing for mushrooms, if you take too little, you kind of stuck in that uncomfortable space where you're just uncomfortable and you're kind of tripping, but you're not tripping enough to like really get something from it. So what he compares it to is when you're taking a plane, the takeoff may be a little rough, but once you break through the clouds, then it's mostly smooth sailing. And so with the heroic dose, what you're really doing is you're trying to dose it high enough that you are breaking through the clouds, which means that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have a little bit of a challenging time coming up, but you're able to go really deep with a heroic dose. So my recommendation for that is to do a little bit of preparation and research and kind of think of, why do you want to do this? Is there anything that you're wanting to learn? Is there anything that you want to learn about yourself? And especially when we look at psychedelic assisted therapy with psilocybin, what are you wanting to let go of? Is there just, what are you trying to get from this experience, basically? Which doesn't mean that this should be your expectation, because medicines always take you where you need to go. But to have a little bit of reverence around that and to really take this as, this might be one of the most important experiences of my life, which a lot of research actually has shown with end of life patients who were giving higher doses of psilocybin to come to terms with their own death, dying. Many people have ranked that experience as the top 5 experiences of their entire life, including, like their children being born, including them getting married. So there is something huge, just something there that may have a huge impact on your life. And if you actually have a little bit of reverence around that and find the importance in that, I can promise you that it will. And that's the beautiful thing, is like the spectrum on which all of this exists it depends on you. And I think that is what I love to educate people about, is that you have so much agency over where you're going with this. Like you can have a super challenging time and you're just uncomfortable and you're terrified and you're resisting and you're just suffering and you feel unsafe. Or you can have maybe still a challenging time, but you're getting so much out of it because you know that you're in a safe space. You know how to come back to your breath. You know how to use some of these tools that are all internal. Like they're not outside of yourself, but just to come back to kind of guiding your mind a little bit and calming yourself in that space where you can navigate a lot. And this is one of the most interesting things for people who are more in those spaces. You are eventually able to really guide where you want to go, and you can get very, very like pinpoint almost what you want to get out of the experience and where you want to go and where it actually takes you. So
can I jump in for a sec?
Sorry.
No, that was beautiful. I think, so Cordy mentioned the set and setting that falls under sort of the preparation, right? Like preparing for this experience. Then you have the experience itself. Then you have the integration that hopefully happens afterwards. And what you were starting to allude to of really holding yourself and controlling yourself and having agency over the experience, I think that's a really important piece that's often overlooked a little bit, because you hear people talk about set and setting, but you don't always hear people talk about how to actually act while you're under the influence of the mushrooms. So what was your experience like? Can I ask? Like you said, it was kind of challenging the second half of your mushroom experience.
Yeah, I've never talked about it publicly, so I'll
Are you comfortable with
it?
Yeah,
no, totally. So a buddy of mine and I went out to the Oregon coast. He knew a little spot outside of Lincoln City that was a great little camping spot and had a little cave right next to us.
Nice.
He wanted to go on an adventure. He'd done it before. I was not much of the adventuring type. I was, it was funny when you were talking earlier about go and kind of being wound up and those. Yeah, I fit that archetype for sure. Had graduated college recently. And so this was our trip, and everything was fine for a little while. And then I saw this family, like they walked over and there were these like wood pillars. These are actual pillars. I'm not making, or rocks, excuse me. They were rocks. And they were jumping on the rocks. One of the people that stopped by, she was a girl, probably about 16, 17. And she was a little person. She had dwarfism in some way, shape, or form. Which oddly enough, I've heard that sometimes like mushrooms make you see things like that. It's like actually like Gaelic, and this whole has nothing to do with that. It's just what I saw. This guy was from Tigard, Oregon. He was talking to me about my camp spot.
Oh,
I couldn't hold on a conversation. I thought I was wearing my sunglasses. I told him, he just woke me up. He's like, you've been talking to me for, it was a weird situation. Anyway, they leave. They're a beautiful family. And like, I was just starting to feel good. Like I was feeling really warm for them and seeing their kind of connection and all this other stuff. And as they started to kind of walk away, I looked back into the fire, and then I just was washed over with like shame and regret for things that I didn't do with my family, like my parents, and like just some things from childhood, like washed up. And I started looking up into the clouds, and the clouds were betraying me with the way that they looked. And I look over to the left and I see this cave, this little cave setting I was setting up, and there was water running down on the inside of it. And the way the light was reflecting off of it was like beautiful blues and purples. And I ended up seeing the face of a door knocker, like a lion door knocker. And then I went into this like deep spiral, to which I started throwing up and thinking I was going to die in a tent.
Yeah.
And then my buddy showed up like 2 hours later, and he was like, hey, I pet a deer. Like I was having a good time in the woods. Where have you been? And then
just over here dying.
Yeah. And so, again, unguided, like I was drinking most of the day. I chewed a half a can of Copenhagen long cut sitting on the beach as well. So I got nicotine in my system as well. I was not set.
It was not ideal. Yeah. Well, yeah. So this is a perfect example. And thank you so much for sharing that. I know it's weird to talk about.
If you end up looking at my right arm, I actually have a big tattoo of a tree of life. And in there, I have the door knocker lion.
Wow.
The same one that I saw.
That's
awesome.
And the reason I have that is I saw that door knocker lion in my dreams probably every week for the next 6 to 7 years until my son was born. And my son, oddly enough, I'm not a big astrology guy, but he was born a Leo, oddly enough. And I'm like, all right, listen, I'm just gonna put the lion in the tree of life and go from there.
I'm also not super into astrology, but today is called the Lion's Gate because there's
8/8's the Lion's Gate, and one of my favorite bands, Lions at the Gate.
Interesting. But so this is a pretty neat example. Like this is actually perfect of you have this interaction with this family, and then it sounds like that triggered all of these feelings of shame and guilt around things in your own family, right? Yeah. And that's what we talk about when we say the mushrooms can really teach you a lot, and they can show you these things that maybe you're not really proud of how you acted before. Maybe you really do feel bad about something, or maybe you've got something weighing on your mind that in day-to-day life, we can just push that off. But then the mushrooms are like, hey, motherfucker, like you need to look at this because you're actually not okay with this. And then if you got the tools to work with it, that can transform into something really beautiful. You at the time did not have the tools to work with it, and it spiraled into just a hellscape for hours, I bet.
Yeah.
So what that actually looks like, again, forgive me for all the jujitsu analogies, but it's
dude,
perfect.
You're in the right place for those. Like,
I love right on. So imagine like a white belt being mounted by someone with just crushing pressure. right?
Yeah.
And they're just freaking the fuck out because they have no idea what to do and they're just thrashing around. And it's like, bro, all you got to do is like get your frames in and like take a breath. Like you're actually okay. Like, yeah, you're not in a good spot. It's showing you that maybe you need to work on your fucking mount escapes because you can't go anywhere. But guess what? If you can kind of come back to center and just take a breath and recognize that everything's okay, you're going to have a much more enjoyable round than if you just keep thrashing.
Yeah.
So the set and setting comes into play with like, hey, you know, maybe don't be drinking and chewing tobacco right before doing it. But also, if you have any sort of meditation practice where, you know, you're just sitting and following your breath, that skill is invaluable when you're under the influence of psychedelics to be able to just come back to your breath, recenter yourself, kind of tell yourself everything's going to be okay. And then everything is going to be okay. You know, my first acid experience was just vacillating between like the worst hellscape imaginable and then like the most bliss I'd ever experienced. And it was just a matter of like taking 3 deep breaths and then forgetting to breathe and going back to the hellscape and then remembering to take a few deep breaths and going back to the bliss. So all of that is to say, going back to your original question of like, what should someone do around doing this macro dose? The set and setting, vitally important. And then having some tools just to be able to handle yourself in that space, vitally important. So a meditation practice, you know, I honestly, I feel like meditation practice is probably the way to go. It's easy to implement. It's tough to get into, but it's easy to implement when you're under the influence of that stuff. There's other things like journaling practices, maybe we can talk about as it comes to integration, but
yeah,
I wanted to hit on that piece of like actually handling yourself while you're under the influence.
no,
The one thing that I would add to that is, especially on like really high doses, is to have a guide. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, like a specialist, but having someone who understands the space, who is sober and who holds the space for you. That doesn't mean that your guide interferes with your actual experience, but they're just making sure you're safe, you know, you're comfortable, which doesn't mean that you might not still have a super challenging experience, but just to have someone there when you're freaking out who's like, take a deep breath, it's all okay. And like you, how people are able to go from absolutely freaking out to just remembering, okay, I'm actually safe here, nothing can happen to me, and like coming back down and going back into the experience and continuing the journey it's really life-changing. It is honestly for really big doses, unless you are very experienced, I would always recommend to be with somebody that you trust and to be in an environment that is safe and comfortable. Doesn't mean that it has to be in your own home. Like being outside is beautiful, but also thinking of, you know, what do you do if it's going to rain or storm? You know, that's happened to me before, where just outside and you're in a tent and then like a storm's coming in and you're tripping and you're like, fuck, like what do you do? And like how do you deal with just natural weather phenomena in that state, you know, when you've got like maybe 4 hours to go?
Yeah.
And just having somebody there that is keeping you safe. And just think of, in your regular state of mind when you're anxious, how easy it is to spiral even further into that. And then you amplify, because a lot of times mushroom, they amplify, like David said, what's already there. So if something's coming up and you're starting to get anxious and you don't know how to get yourself back, it's so easy to spiral into that. And having somebody to, where, you know, okay, like at least like I'm not gonna die, you know, like no matter what I do, I'm not gonna just like walk off that cliff or like walk into this lake or like do something really stupid. It just helps in the mindset to know that it's all gonna be fine.
Yeah. All right. So now I got to pivot to ayahuasca.
Sure.
Okay. I have done a little bit of research. I am ready to get an education. I think the first thing is, it seems like reading various posts around going to South America, going to Mexico, different places to get treatment. There almost seems like there's kind of a little bit of divide. It seems like some folks feel like the rituals of the peoples native to the area are not being, I don't know, upheld necessarily.
Yeah.
And that it's almost like I don't know, like a low key Cancun, like just going to kind of like missing the point a little bit.
Yeah,
And that there's people who have entered the space that maybe, I don't know, not so interested in your overall psyche. Just it's money making. Maybe they know somebody knows how
totally.
to make it, something like that. And then there
Totally.
are, you know, individuals out there that are trying to connect to those rituals and open the door for people who don't have access in other parts of the world. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. Your perspective on this, like what,
Yeah.
you know, you've been navigating the space. You're not from, neither one of you are from South American countries, things like that. So give me your perspective.
I'm actually really happy that you bring this up because it is an important thing to talk about, especially now. Like we have Aaron Rodgers talking about doing ayahuasca, right? So like so many more people are getting interested in it. You raise the point of, you know, honoring the cultures, honoring the traditions, and we can talk more about how this works. But I am 100% convinced that drinking the actual DMT containing brew has very little to do with the healing that takes place. I think that the true effects of ayahuasca come from communing with the spirits of the plants. And I know how crazy that might sound to like a normal person, but I just off the bat, I think that that is vital. Doing it the right way, which means doing it with indigenous healers who have spent their entire lives training. So our maestros, they've been serving ayahuasca together for over 20 years. They've dedicated their entire lives to the study and cultivation of this plant and the traditional way that their Shipibo lineage has done it forever. So I think that is hugely important. But there is a barrier to access there, right? Like a flight to Peru costs what, like $2,000 maybe, depending on where you're
Mm-hmm.
flying from. All right, maybe like $1,000. Either way, it's expensive, and then the retreat center is expensive. So there does need to be some solution found so that this isn't just the medicine for rich people, right? And that is what drives people to seek ayahuasca experiences maybe closer to home, like in Mexico or in the States. And then you run into this issue of maybe you have a native healer who's brought in for the ceremony. You're still not on their land. They're still probably compromising a lot of the ways that they actually would practice it just because they're not in their own place. Or you're doing it with just like some white dude who bought some ayahuasca off the dark web. And maybe best case scenario, he experienced it once, so he thinks he knows what he's doing. And bro, there's more harm. Like I feel like that shit does more harm than good. That's like training at a McDojo and thinking that you understand self-defense. You know, like you're going down a bad path with that.
Please don't
So,
stop the martial arts references. This is one
oh
of my
dude, I'm
favorite
gonna keep
podcasts
them
of all
coming,
time.
bro.
Yeah,
This is
keep them coming.
perfect.
Keep them coming.
He's got lots of them.
Yeah.
Dude, I talk in jujitsu analogies. Like you understand. It's just like how you explain shit. So I'm so happy to talk to someone who I know gets it.
No,
But
100%. And I love this perspective, by the way, where it's, you know, so that you've connected with folks in, you said in Peru, or
yeah.
where do you guys go?
Yeah, we go to Peru, this little area called Pucallpa, which is deep in the jungle. And I'll let Cordy talk. So I'm not just hogging all this mic time. But you know, I brought up these issues of ayahuasca should be done in a traditional setting with traditional healers, but there is this barrier to entry of the cost of it.
Yeah.
And to that end, we've actually recently started a nonprofit organization, future nonprofit, legally not a nonprofit yet. We're waiting on the IRS approval, but we've started this future nonprofit organization to support this center, which acts just with the utmost integrity and the utmost honor of their cultural traditions, and to help connect people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it to be able to come on retreat with us, with a focus on like veterans with PTSD and people overcoming addiction.
Wow.
So maybe I'll let Cordy talk a little bit about the center itself, but this I'm starting to realize is like the purpose of our fucking life. And, you know, I mentioned that like we met at an ayahuasca retreat. Like I completely believe that Mother Ayahuasca brought us together for a purpose. And I see our life now as this like vehicle to serve that and to help connect more people to it and to help maintain the traditions and the culture around it and sort of help preserve them and help preserve the integrity of how the medicine can be used. So I'll let Cordy maybe talk a little bit about our actual center and the maestros.
Yeah, for sure.
Jake, any like thing that you want to just ask on
Yeah,
that, on what
like
they just said?
all right, so I fly into Peru. okay. I hop in. I don't know. In my mind, I see like a 6-wheeled truck with like the wood paneling on the side, and I'm riding that with like I got a backpack on the back. I don't know if that's happening, but I can let me have that in my mind. And I show up where I'm showing up in the jungle. What is this whole thing? Like, what is the ritual? I walk over, you put
what is
a
the
tablet.
ceremony like?
I take a shot of it, and then I'm going until
All
I.
right, yeah, cool. No, this is good questions.
What's the ceremony? Take me through that.
Yeah.
So I can really only speak to the Shipibo way. So the Shipibo is an ethnic group from Peru, and a lot of the Shipibo have worked for ayahuasca for generations. So these are long lineages of, they're called maestros. So they don't call themselves shamans or anything. They just call themselves maestros, which literally means teacher or healer, curandero or ayahuasquero. And so the word shaman.
You said they've worked for ayahuasca.
No, they've worked for like years.
I think that was just a verbal typo.
Verbal typo.
No, but that's an interesting point though, because they do have such reverence for these plants, and they'll tell you that the plants do everything, and the plants have taught them everything.
Yeah. No, sorry, I was queuing into something that maybe you were saying subconsciously, but I really did feel like
English isn't her first language. It happens sometimes.
That's true.
No. Continue. I'm sorry.
But so I can really only speak to how the Shipibo ceremony work, and more specifically how, because it's always going to be a little bit different. There's ayahuasca in Ecuador, in Colombia, in Brazil. So all around the Amazon where ayahuasca is native, you have different cultures, different lineages working with ayahuasca in different ways. But what they all have in common is that it is a lineage. So you will train with a teacher, and you will train for years, if not decades. And most people who serve ayahuasca in these lineages, they start when they're teenagers. They get introduced to it from a very young age, and then they apprentice, and they go into the jungle in isolation and just sit with the plants for weeks and months at a time. It is this incredible and a little bit of an insane for us to think journey of really connecting to the plants and being able to talk to the spirits. Because what ayahuasca is, when you work with someone who is from a lineage and who works with you, is it's like an energetic surgery almost. So they are able to see your energy, they align you, they align what's out of order, they pull things out of you energetically that have been stuck. And it's so hard to explain that in words, because you really have to be there. But that is one of the things where ayahuasca is a very ineffable experience. But the ceremony itself, so the center that we are working with, like David said, is in this little town, or just outside of this little town called Pucallpa, which is in the Peruvian Amazon. And so the maestros, it's a married couple. Her name is Maestra Silvia, and his name is Maestro Noe. And they've been married for over 20 years. They have 4 children. They're all involved in the center. One of their daughters is getting trained already to be a maestra, and they're all just helping out there. So it's this beautiful just family, and not just their family, but also the cousins and the extended family helping to, honestly, from scratch, build this center. So they just started just with a piece of land, and like just them cleared it out, started building little cabins to have people come in and sit with them. And they both worked at very established centers all around South America. Sylvia worked at Soltara for a very long time,. Which is one of the most renowned ayahuasca centers in this day and age. And it's a very, like wonderful center, incredible facilitators.
Do you want to walk them through what a ceremony actually looks like, or
yes.
what the week retreat actually looks like?
Yeah,
yes.
for sure. So it's a 1-week endeavor.
Yeah.
Different places do it differently.
Different places do it differently.
Our site, usually it's a week.
Yeah. A lot of places do a week, and throughout that week you will have multiple ceremonies. So a lot of places will do 4 ceremonies. We do 5, and what that actually gives you, it gives you the opportunity to not rush through it. So think of, you're getting acquainted with the spirit of ayahuasca. So you're not just, when you meet someone new, you're not just going to like barge into their door and kicking them and be like, here I am, give me what I want to see. But you're going to, go knock on the door. You're going to introduce yourself and just kind of like shake their hand, be like, hey, this is, like, I'm Jake.
Well, hey,
How's it
neighbor.
going? Hey,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Well, hey,
hey,
neighbor. I love
ayahuasca, how
that.
you doing?
I brought you a pie.
And and so you can almost see that entire week as one big ceremony. And a lot of times the first ceremony will be very mild, and so ayahuasca is a brew. So it's this like thicker, like almost like viscous, like dark red, brownish.
Got the consistency of like a grossly thick protein shake, maybe.
That's beautiful
Yeah.
image.
It does not taste good. It actually tastes worse over the course of the week.
That's true.
Kind of like you were saying, like you did mushrooms and you're like, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
Like no one drinks ayahuasca and they're like, fuck yeah, let's go drink some more ayahuasca.
So, all right, you're gonna have to. So I also hear the word like iboga. Is that totally different? Is that like a different plant?
Yeah, it's totally different.
Okay.
Totally different. So I'm not an expert in that. I know it comes sort of from a similar kind of thing because it's like a vine and the bark of a plant. I think that's mostly from Africa, actually.
Okay.
I don't know too much about it, but yeah, totally separate world.
And then also with ayahuasca, do you have to take a separate drink to like absorb it? Or I've heard some things like that, like MAO inhibitors.
Yeah. I'll break this down for you for a second.
Please.
So the ayahuasca brew, when you're talking about ayahuasca, the drink, it's actually a combination of at least two plants. So there's the ayahuasca vine, which is just like the one plant that actually contains the MAO inhibitor. Okay. And then there's another plant. It's typically the chacruna leaf or chacruna leaf that actually contains the DMT. So the ayahuasca, because it has the MAO inhibitor, it makes that DMT orally active. Normally, you would have to smoke and inhale DMT for it to have any effect because monoamine oxidase breaks it down in your belly. Yeah. So the ayahuasca vine allows the chacruna leaf to be active. So those two are combined into the tea or into the brew that is known as ayahuasca. Okay. So each culture and even within the culture, each maestro might have his own little unique blend. They might throw in a few other plants. And interestingly, kind of like how Eskimos have like 50 words for what we just call snow, right? So the ayahuasqueros might recognize like 10 or 15 or even 20 different varieties of this vine that we just call ayahuasca, but they actually recognize the subtle differences. So they might have.
It's like it's like walking into a pot shop and there's like OG Kush and Sour D. Like, not that I've ever been in one.
Bro, just give me weed. And it's like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
So what's really cool is like during the ceremony, Maestro Noe is serving the ayahuasca and he's got like 6 or 12 even different bottles of ayahuasca. And it's funny because this is like the most sacred drink you could possibly imagine. And it's in like old Coca-Cola bottles or like, but he's got like 12 different ones and he recognizes your energy and he knows what your intention is and what you're there to work on because you've talked to him one-on-one using us as translators. And he's able to give you an exact blend of like the right brews, the right batches of ayahuasca to guide your experience to exactly what you need, which it's crazy. And so Cordy mentioned, we do 5 ceremonies. And the reason for that is you kind of have this one extra night. The first night is what they would call a diagnostic night of ayahuasca. So they're working with the ayahuasca and with you and with your energy to see what your problems are and to see where things are stuck within your subtle body so that they get to understand more deeply how they can help you over the course of the week. After that first night where they're kind of seeing how you act under the medicine, then we have one-on-ones with the maestro where you might go in and tell them what's going on with you and tell them what your intentions are and tell them what you're hoping to get from this. And then they use all of that information to guide you throughout the remaining 4 ceremonies in order to actually get this healing from Mother Ayahuasca.
I heard famous comedian Ron White actually used ayahuasca to stop drinking. And the guy owns a tequila company, right?
Yeah.
So in these types of situations that you're talking about, first night would be like, the apple pie, like, oh, hey, how you doing, ayahuasca? Yeah, that's great. Let's get oriented. And then I would go have conversations along, hey, I drink too much. Like, hey, this is really something I'm looking to explore. This is what I felt from the first night. Like, this is what I'm hoping to leave with. Cordy, somebody like yourself, I imagine you've done this a few times.
Mm-hmm.
So do you do the introduction night? Do you do do you still do the 5-day, or do you just, is it something different if you've been there, done that? Like how do the intermediate to advanced users of the ayahuasca participate?
Well, there's a little bit of a difference with me too, because there's like two ways. Like one of them is I'm a facilitator. So that means that I'm not participating in the ceremony in the same way as the guests do. So I will have what's called a facilitator dose, which is a very low dose of ayahuasca. So it's like a sip. But most people like on like a cup of ayahuasca, it's like a little like shot glass, which to me, like one of the worst things, not even like the taste of ayahuasca, it's me drinking out of a shot glass, because that brings up so many memories where I'm just like, oh God.
Yeah.
And so if I can, I will actually choose a different cup, just a different like vessel.
Yeah.
But so on a facilitator dose, I drink very, very little so that I'm just fully functional in the space, able to assist people, all that stuff.
But your antennas are out, like you're connecting.
My
to
antennas
the mother,
are out.
right?
Exactly. Yes.
You're in the same space as everyone else.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, even if you're not drinking, and this is honestly, we're working with really gifted maestros and the indigenous people who are the stewards of this medicine comes in, that, like David said, drinking the actual ayahuasca often has very little to do with it. Where something that, especially in the Shipibo lineage, but also other lineages, what they will do is, so it's not just, you drink the brew, you sit down on your mat, lights go out, and then you go trip. But what they actually do is they sing to you. So the maestros have sacred songs that are called icaros. And the icaros are songs that have been given to them by the plants through years and years and years of sitting with these plants, of learning from their teachers, of learning from the plants. And what they do with the icaros, they use them to align you. So even if you're not drinking and they come and they sing, you have that experience very often. I've sat in many, many ceremonies where people, especially in the last ceremony, where people were deciding not to actually drink and partake in the medicine taking because they got everything that they wanted already and everything that they needed from the experience, which I think is a really beautiful thing when it's kind of like Terence McKenna says, when you get the message, you can hang up the phone. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people, like when they get what they came for, they're like, I'm good. Yeah. But they still like sit in the ceremony just without drinking. And very, very often.
I was going to ask, so just an analogy, just to make sure I understand, is the kind of the singing almost like an energetic chiropractic adjustment? Like it's just kind of like it just kind of, gets you there.
We often use the term like energetic surgery, and people have even reported feeling that. So this is actually a little bit of a tangent, but after a few nights, we'll do like a group share where everyone kind of talks a little bit about their experience. When I was at Soltara, 3 different people experienced being visited by what they described as aliens who came down and did surgery on their bodies using light. And 3 different people within the same night had the same like visual experience of these entities coming down and working on their bodies. It's crazy.
That's interesting.
So yes, energetic surgery is what's going on right there.
I can't help, like, I'm going to just put a pin in this for a second. I just can't help but like, I'm so interested in this world, and it's like I'm hanging in there with everything that you're saying, but I imagine folks who have not done much research around this is listening to this conversation going like what are these fucking hippies doing, man? They're just going out to the jungle, sitting in a drum circle, trying to give it meaning. Like, I mean, and I can understand why people feel that way. Like, I can understand maybe having a lot of people are selling a really bad bill of goods out there. They're trying to convince people that something is going to change their life or something's going to do whatever. Like, is there, from your experiences and watching people go through this, like, what is kind of the most profound, like, what do you get re-anchored around? Like, what do you just like, what have you seen? What have you felt that just that gives you the fire that you have today to continue to be in this space. I guess that's what I'm interested in, because I want folks that are listening that are sitting there going, I just don't know. I don't know if it's for me, or if I don't know if this is like a real thing that people do, or if they just convince themselves they had like spiritual interactions with aliens doing light surgery on them. Like how do we how do we put a wrapper around this and make it a little more palatable?
Well, I mean, for one thing, is forgive like the appeal to authority, but like I am a doctor of physical therapy, right? I went through like many years of rigorous scientific education. I read scientific papers for fun sometimes. Like when I have a question, I go to Google Scholar and I read scientific literature to answer it. And again, just what I talked about before, like I used to be a super staunch atheist, and I would listen to Sam Harris's arguments and then go fight with my ex-girlfriend who believed in God. And I was just one of those people. And doing ayahuasca just gave me like the complete firm faith that I have now in my religious beliefs, because it showed me that there's so much more that we cannot explain just with our average everyday senses and average everyday consciousness. So, I mean, I don't have a great answer to that question of like kind of how to convince people. The only thing I can say is like, if you're listening to this with complete skepticism, you're probably one of those people who just sees red bro in a fight and like thinks that you can take care of yourself, when you just haven't actually been exposed to how much you don't know yet. I think, you know, it's I think it was Plato, maybe Socrates, who said like, you cannot learn what you think you already know. So if you're actually looking to expand your mind with this a little bit, you kind of have to put down that disbelief, and you have to put down that sense of, I already know how everything works. You know, it's very clear that humans really don't know the way things work just with our basic senses, right? So like, we didn't know that ultraviolet light existed until we developed the scientific tools to sense it. It's very real, right? It guides the behavior of bees. I don't know if you know this, but bees are attracted to the ultraviolet light on flowers. They're a very, very intelligent species, and their behavior is dictated by this thing that human beings don't even have the capacity to sense. It would be completely foolish to say that that's not real. Like, oh, what are these bees doing? It makes no sense. It's just because you can't see what they can see, because they have the tools to sense it. And I think that psychedelics offer us these new eyes to see the world with that we normally don't have access to. And it's not a great argument. I wish there was a better way to explain it, but it's kind of one of those things like, you got to try it.
I think that kind of hits the nail on the head of what I was getting at, was trying to lean into like, what is that value proposition for suspending disbelief? And I think to your point, there are a lot of things that we continue to learn and understand. And we're so, you know, I think adolescent in a lot of ways, and our ability to comprehend our world and the meaning of our world.
Absolutely. And to someone who is hearing us say this and is just completely turned off to it, that's okay. Like, I'm not telling you to come to the jungle with me and sit with ayahuasca. Maybe that's not the place for you to start, but there is probably some other practice that you can pick up that will allow you to start listening to these subtler things that are going on. So start with a meditation practice, start with journaling, start with fucking jujitsu. If you're not training, start
always
somewhere,
start with
but
jujitsu.
Always start with jujitsu.
First step.
First step, train. Yeah.
All right. So I'm just doing a quick time check here, and I'm going to make sure you guys have a little extra time as well. But I want the folks listening, as well as I'd love to know as well, like, get me acclimated to your ecosystem. Like, where do we go to find more information? Totally. What will we find there? Like, where are some resources that we should go to go and learn on this stuff? Far away.
Well, I'll start with this, because if someone's listening to this, you're clearly into podcasts. So I have a podcast myself. It's called The Way Broadly. You probably know this quote: when you know the way broadly, you see it in all things. Miyamoto Musashi, right?
Right. Yeah.
So Cordy and I have started doing this whole series of little episodes all about microdosing psilocybin, all about ayahuasca. So if you're into podcasts already, go there. There's
The Way Broadly
on there. The Way Broadly. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Link in the notes. Check out the notes. It'll be there.
From there, Cordy, what's the next best thing?
I would honestly say, so the Absolute Passion Project, which kind of links everything else that we're doing, is the future nonprofit, but it's already an established organization called the Plant Medicine Preservation Project, and the website is plantmedicineproject.com. And on there, you can find how to support Indigenous healers working with plant medicine right at the source, how you can help them preserve their way of life, their culture, and their way of working with plant medicine. That's the one part. And then the other part is we are funding full scholarships for especially people with PTSD, so thinking combat veterans and people overcoming addictions, for a fully paid trip to Peru, full preparation, integration, and just really making this accessible for people who are not otherwise able to afford it. And I think this is the most important one. The other thing, because you, at the very beginning of the podcast, you were mentioning becoming which is more of the private endeavor of David and I. So like I said, I work as an integration specialist. I work as a breathwork facilitator. And my specialty, I would say, and just where my heart lies, is really the preparation and the integration of not just ayahuasca, but all other plant medicines. So what I've done is I created an online course that is very affordable, easily accessible. It is a step-by-step guided program that gives you everything that you need to know from psychedelics and safety, where to find trusted centers, intention setting, breath work, meditation practices, what to do at the retreat, like how you can ground it, how you can get connected back to yourself, and then over 6 months worth of guided step-by-step integration. So for people who would like to do this, who cannot afford to work with an integration specialist, who don't know where to start, that is, I would say, a very, very good resource to start with that I would love to direct people to. And you can find that at becomingom.com.
What's your Instagram, Cordy?
My Instagram is becoming.om.
Becoming
Sir.
I love it. I love it. Anything that we didn't talk about today that's upcoming, noteworthy, or a stone unturned, because I got a little extra time if we want to go somewhere else with it. But I just want to make sure that we've hit all the topics that are important to you too.
We definitely got some time too. We got nothing else going on tonight, I don't think. But I think, dude, we could talk about this shit for hours.
I see that.
The most important thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to tell anyone who's listening is, as we started the podcast, I alerted David to the fact that he and I had met before about a year ago at a jiu-jitsu camp in Maine. And I didn't know, in scheduling David, that he was the same person until I was doing my prep work earlier this morning and dropped by his Instagram page and saw a picture of myself on his Instagram page and some of his reels. And I just started laughing. I was like, oh man, I did beat this guy. So we have actually rolled in jiu-jitsu though.
Funny how that works, man, right?
But I think I had 100 rolls while I was out there for a week. So there's no way to remember it, but I'm looking forward to that.
Dude, well, here I'll get to the actual thing that I want to talk about in a second, but just a quick little fun fact is I was microdosing LSD for most of that week.
Oh wow.
I recorded 2 podcasts that week, actually. I don't know if I should say this.
Oh, go ahead.
But I was accidentally on more than a little bit of a microdose when I recorded one of them, and I'm sitting in a room and the mosaic tile on the wall behind this gentleman's head is just dancing as I'm trying to ask him serious questions. And I think it was actually a great podcast, but I had all my gear and stuff with me there. You'll fucking appreciate this when you go listen to mine. The intro is Jocko Willink saying, "This is the Way Broadly podcast," which was one of the coolest moments of my entire life, getting him to record that for me.
Oh man, that is awesome.
It was pretty tight.
That is so good.
So the actual question you asked of what else is there to talk about that we haven't hit on, I think we would be remiss to not talk about the integration process after this stuff.
Please.
So we can go on forever about the details of the ceremony and everything, but just from a safety point of view, I think it's irresponsible to talk about psychedelics without talking about integration. Because that's where the magic actually happens of transforming this from some crazy experience where you saw some weird visuals to this is actually something that changed my life in a very positive way and continues to have an effect on my day-to-day life. And if you don't integrate things, you can be in a pretty rough fucking mental place for a while, which it sounds like you maybe experienced for a little while after your mushroom mushroom journey?
I actually did. Yeah, I had a
Yeah.
hard time kind of making heads or tails of the situation and just trying to understand if I was doing something recreationally. But it was one of the first times in my life that I felt humbled enough to contemplate the fact that I knew nothing. Like I like,
Yeah.
there was a point in time, whether I was having what I would consider a bad trip or not, that I realized how much I was holding on to something I had no control over. And I think, to sacrifice control, to just to give
The
it up
surrender.
as part of the process, surrendering is probably the right word. It's not something that I have much experience with, at least with that substance, but I know I felt it for a period of time, and it was the thing that stuck with me most.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is usually the root of a quote unquote bad trip. I prefer the term challenging experience, but where you're trying to hold on to something or you're trying to force it to go one way when the medicine is trying to go a very different direction, right? Like imagine you're only ever trying to hit an arm bar. You're going to miss all these other opportunities and you're going to have a really bad time during that role if you refuse to just surrender to what the experience or what the situation is giving you to work with. So I love that you brought that up, and that gets back to what I said of being able to hold yourself and work with the experience as it comes up.
I think you're going to start a whole spin-off podcast called Psychedelic Submissions.
Bro, wait, that's a cool fucking name.
That is a really cool name.
Take it.
But dude, I'm telling you, there is a fucking world of overlap between psychedelic spirituality and jiu-jitsu. And I think there's already a ton of interest in this. Bro, just within my gym back home, I recorded an episode of my podcast about microdosing, and all my buddies were listening to it. Like 3 separate people came up to me and told me that they were microdosing. This is within the 6 a.m. class. 3 different people were microdosing, and they never knew that the other people were because they didn't think it was okay to talk about. So that's like part of my mission, aside from everything we're doing with the ayahuasca centers. Like, I just want to give people a place to talk about this in a constructive way, because it's there. The interest is there. The need for it is there. And jiu-jitsu people are already on such a good path. So I just want to augment that a little bit. But beautiful. Okay, we can actually talk about
back to integration. Sorry.
so many rabbit holes.
Cordy, you take this one.
Like David said, it's, like integration really makes the difference between maybe this was just, cool, I went to Peru, like sat in a jungle, had a funky, trippy experience, and I can make changes that are absolutely transformational and life-changing. And so the integration basically refers to everything that comes after. So it's the weeks, months, and sometimes even years after the experience where you are starting to integrate in a way that is sustainable and in a way that is actually supporting you in where you want to go. And this is something what our maestro always says is you need to focus on where you want to go. And that is where integration really comes in handy, because a lot of times there's a lot of stuff that you need to let go of. Many times that experience sparks a huge change in your life, from switching careers or quitting your job, maybe breaking up with your partner, moving somewhere else, pursuing a different career, something that, just that is more in alignment with who you actually are and who you want to be. And making that change can feel incredibly overwhelming, because you just came out of this incredible experience and now you're back home, maybe at your 9 to 5 with all the people that are still doing the same thing every day. And you just had this insane experience and this eye-opening ceremony and expansion of their consciousness. And a lot of people feel really overwhelmed with, where do I go from here? Like, what do I actually do? And so I think it's really important to know that it's not great to do any drastic or make any drastic decisions right after coming out of this, but to really take the time to, like small steps make really big changes. And when we think of creating better habits or starting to set boundaries and really starting to align your life in a way where this is not just something that's going to be with me for, the month after the ceremony, but a lot of people, like, they have this experience once and their entire life changes without them ever going back to it, because they are integrating. And so, you said that the mushrooms, you only really had one experience, and that showed you something. And even though maybe you didn't know how to integrate in that moment, over the years you still did. And
Yeah.
Did you get a lot from that?
For me, I think it started me down a way of thinking that was more open. I think through chance and knowing just people who are interested in a variety of, I would say off the common path kind of ways of dealing with things. I've been big into trying stuff out. I got big into sensory deprivation tanks. I'm a huge fan of sauna and cold plunging and putting myself into those types of states where you are present and you're like dealing with that mentally. That's taken time. I've also just done really hard stuff. I did a 75-hour program. It was like a boot camp style program that just is absolutely unbearable. It was so painful to go through. Made it through the other side on that, and just pushing myself to do those things. I've found, I don't know. I'm scratching that itch a little bit, but I would be lying if I said I didn't still have plenty of work to do. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that I've leaned toward looking into ayahuasca and taking a trip and doing those things more seriously, especially because I've had several friends come back from trips like that and say, hey, reintroduce themselves to me and be like, hey, I'm going to, I found some things out and I don't know what that's going to do as it manifests in my life, but man, I see things a little bit differently now. And I see myself a little bit differently now. And it's going to take me some time to figure out what that means. And it's pretty cool to see people go through experiences like that.
It's beautiful that you see that in yourself. And of course you still have work to do, dude. Like we do too. I've got plenty of work to do. Everyone does. And the way I look at ayahuasca, you're going to love this one. It's jiu-jitsu analogy. It's like going into a private lesson with like a jiu-jitsu grandmaster. Imagine like if Helio Gracie was here and you could like sit down with him for a week of like a private seminar. You're going to go into that, hopefully having done some homework, right? Like you're not just going to roll in there. You're going to analyze your game and you're going to say, these are my weak points. And I really want to learn X, Y, and Z, just like you've been able to do with your life through all these experiences you've had. Maybe it's shown you what areas you still have to work on. Where the surrender comes in is recognizing that you might not even be asking the right questions. So maybe you get to your private lesson and you're like, hey, I really want to work on like worm guard. And your professor's like, bro, shut up. Like we need to work on guard passing basics before we even get there. Right. So when you roll into the ayahuasca experience, you have these intentions that you've set out that you really want to get some clarity on, or you really want to work on, but the medicine might show you something that you weren't prepared to see. Maybe for you, it might bring up those feelings of grief or shame around whatever happened within your family in the past. And again, if you're clinging so tightly to like, no, just please teach me worm guard, like you're not going to have a great time. Right. So that's where that surrender comes into play during the actual experience. But then let's say you go through this week private seminar and it's like drinking from a fire hose where you learn so many things. Like how many techniques did you learn last year at Origin Camp that just went right out your brain because you didn't go home and drill them? Right?
Oh, so many. And I was actually just about to bring this up because we learned so many different things. It's, I think about like the one that blew my mind was Danielle Kelly. Like all you remember that? I was just that leg entry series and the whole deal. You're just like, my brain's just trying to wrap itself around it. The thing that stuck with me was, and I say it all the time on this podcast, it's usually the background of my phone. It's something Ricardo Laborio said, which was learn how to lose without losing faith. Somebody asked him, like in the camp, they said, what's like, sum up jujitsu. What is jujitsu to you? Like, share your knowledge. He said, jujitsu is the art of learning to lose without losing faith. And
that's beautiful. And that's such a Laborio thing to say. I love him so much.
I do too. And so like, I walked away from that camp and I was just like, that was the thing that I was meant to hear. And for me, that was better than learning any technique. That was the one piece of whatever that I can propel into the rest of my life and be a better person for it.
And so how did that piece of wisdom show up for you in your life after that camp?
Yeah. I, even though that I don't mind being tapped out, I think I get the little biting ego like anybody else. Right. But like, it just put it into perspective. It put it in perspective that people like him, people at the top, like toward the top of the mountain, like kind of looking down, that have learned more techniques and forgotten more techniques than I'll ever learn.
Yeah. Right.
Like, they're sitting there saying the most important thing is keeping your ego in check and understanding that jujitsu is bigger than where you are right now, and have faith Have faith and you'll expand your knowledge in it. Have faith and you'll cut brush on the path that you're meant to cut brush. And you're going to take an L. You're going to like, it's built in, it's inevitable that you're going to lose, but like, what do you want out of this? What did you expect? And it made me think about a lot of that when I was going home. So it certainly, it's paid off.
So that's the integration process. And this is actually like a perfect, like that origin camp. I'm just realizing this now, like that week-long camp is a perfect reflection of like a week-long ayahuasca journey where you get shown all of these things. And maybe there's one thing that you really hold on to because that's exactly what you needed to hear right then and there. And you hold on to that and you take it home and you incorporate that into your game and into your life and into your mentality. And you work with that. And now here you are going back to origin camp a year later. Think of how much your game has changed and your life has changed. And now you're ready to receive another little nugget of wisdom from one of these guys and take that home with you and carry it.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And so like more tactically, like how does the integration process work post ayahuasca? Is it breath work? Is it like, what are the things that you do in order to ensure that this doesn't just dissipate when you get home?
Totally. There's different people are going to find different ways to work or different things that work for them. But you can think of it as like taking this technique and drilling it to apply it to your life. So I'm a huge fan of journaling. That's my primary means of integration. But Cordy, this is more your world. You got any thoughts?
Yeah, just like David said, different people will have different practices. So I love what you were saying earlier about that. You do the sensory deprivation tank, you do sauna, cold plunge, because all of these are, it's ways
to work with yourself.
Ways to work with yourself and to be present, like you're saying. And that really is what we're trying to get to, is how can I be more present with myself? So a lot of the integration that I do with people is just really helping them establishing habits and establishing things like what keeps you grounded. If you like to journal, like if that's something that works for you, maybe really working on that, trying to get a little bit more connected to your breath through breath work, through meditation. What has helped me immensely is a yoga practice. The yoga practice is the foundation of everything that I do. And I'm not just talking about the physical part of it. I'm talking about everything that it entails. So that just having my life, trying to live my life as yoga and in union and trying to be really present with that has helped immensely with the integration process. I think it's really important to be able to talk to people. So where's your community? Can you, just when you think of you've had this insane experience and it's been so life-changing for you, and you tell somebody who's never experienced anything like it, who's not open to any of these ideas, and they're going to look at like, what the hell are you talking about? Or even like a more classical therapist where they're like they might be familiar with some of consciousness, but it's a very different animal if you have access to someone who's been in that space and who understands what that actually means, not just what goes on in the brain, but like how you feel it, how you experience it, and can help guide you a little bit through that, just not feeling alone and having the community. And I think what it really boils down to is that to not lose the faith and to recognize that it's not all going to be easy and joyful and rainbows and unicorns, and not during ceremony and not after, but that we do learn a lot just from life, and life has so much depth.
I'm very fascinated by the thing that you said there at the end. I think David, you were about to jump in as well, but let's see if this is in the same vein of thinking. I think what I'm hearing is, just because you go to the jungle and do this does not solve.
No.
This is not a solving of a problem. This is not a healing in the point of ingestion. It's the
first step.
Yeah, it's that catalyst. It's that it's that starting to understand the problem maybe a little bit better, and starting to understand and build out I see in my mind, you ever play any of those games where I'm not a big gamer, but like you start out and you can only see a small part of the map.
Yeah.
And then like you get to explore and the map just expands and expands and expands.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's kind of what this is. It's like you start to kind of expand that map. You start to expand your understanding of your own consciousness and how you want to live your life and how you want to deal with these things. And you need to be actively having that conversation, as opposed to just go to a place and then come back to the current state and wonder why things aren't changed.
Totally, man.
And that is something where, like I said at the very beginning, you have so much agency and you are, and like you're so empowered. And I want to empower people on that journey where the medicine's not going to fix it for you. Like if you go in, like whether it's microdosing, whether it's, it doesn't matter what the hell it is. If you go in and like, this is the magic pill, you know, it's a very Amazon Prime, like same day delivery kind of mindset. Like I'm not willing to do anything for it. Right.
Yeah.
But if you can recognize that this is a journey and your entire life is a journey, but you're able to walk through the rest of your journey with more awareness, feeling more connected, and starting to build better tools to deal with adversity, to deal with the challenges of life, where you're not just reacting to something that's happening to you, but you're actually able to take a breath, to take a step back and to ask yourself, okay, can I act in this situation rather than I'm just acting from my past pain or I'm just getting triggered by this. And that is what, you know, especially the integration really, really helps with, because it allows you to reflect and allows you to slowly, little by little, really work through it. So when I think of the person that I was 6 years ago before I started working with these medicines and who I am now, you would not recognize me. Absolutely. Like the person I am now is very, very different than who I was 6 years ago. And it's not a matter of like I've changed my personality. It's just I've actually connected more to who I truly am. And I've stripped a lot of the layers of, you know, like pain and conditioning and trauma and things where like, this is who I have to be, this is who society wants me to be, or this is what I should like or what I should want. And I'm just getting closer to like the actual core of what the me, you know, quote unquote is. And the most fulfilling thing is not, it's not even like the sitting in ceremony with people. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's a different world, but to see people months after and years after, and to see how much they've grown and to see how much they've worked through and to see who they are after, it's incredible. And it's so humbling. And it's so like, I cannot believe that I get to do this. I cannot believe that I get to witness this miracle. But it's people who are doing the work, and it's people who come. And this is the thing too, like, if you're like, you know, okay, I'm going to go to ayahuasca on a Friday night in LA in someone's living room, I'm going to pay like, you know, like $200. I'm going to like, that is a very different thing than I am going to go to Peru. I'm going to take a week of work, everything. I'm going to be in the jungle without internet connection. You're committed. And you can see the people who are committed, the changes that they make versus a lot of people who are just kind of jumping on I want a trip, I want to have a good time. And, you know, they also a lot of times fall in the trap of working with people who don't have their best interests at heart and who don't hold a safe space, because it is a very, very delicate space. And especially ayahuasca, there's so much more than just drinking, you know, like drinking the brew. It's so much more. And also thinking of, you know, like we're always talking about how can we help indigenous people, how can we preserve, you know, like cultures. And we're so like the virtue signaling, quote unquote. It's not enough to just post something on Instagram. Like this is like, you can actually do it. Like you can directly support people who work with this. You can, you know, and you see how their center grows right as you're there, because you're paying them to be there. And you get to understand a different culture. You get to understand a different lifestyle. You get to be in the rainforest, like in the Amazon, one of the most incredible habitats of the entire world. That is something that it's not just, you know, like you can do all of that while seeking your own healing. And it's amazing to me that we have these opportunities. And just when you think of, especially our maestros, but a lot of these cultures, they are inviting us into their world. They are welcoming us with open arms. These are secrets that they've been given to from generation to generation from the plants, and just that they're sharing this so openly and so willingly. and so humbly with us. There's very little ego in how many of these healers work. That to me is incredible, because it's like sharing. It's like there's no separation of mine and yours. Like we're all like, it's all family, and they live those teachings. And it's amazing just to be in that environment and to see a different way of how families live together without a TV, without internet, right? Without, where there's actual community, people working together, people building something together. And on the last retreat that we went to, yes, the medicine ceremonies were incredible. But so much of the feedback that we're getting is that it is really being in that environment that is life-changing. And honoring that, honoring the people who've held this wisdom for thousands of years. It's so easy. You can do it. Might not be the most comfortable thing, might not be the most convenient thing, but I do think that that's how you should do it.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And let's go ahead and put a pin in it there until the next time that you both join us on the podcast. What a wonderful way to wrap that up. Cordy, David, thank you so much. And again, if you're listening, The Way broadly is the podcast. The Plant Medicine Preservation Project is funding full scholarships for individuals to be able to go out and experience something like this, especially folks with PTSD or dealing with addiction. And finally, becoming Om. Go find Becoming Om. All links in the notes below. And thank you again for your time. Thanks for the education today.
Dude, thank you so much for this. Thank you for your interest, and thanks for having us on, brother.
All right, cheers.